Hello and welcome to a, a story read by and written by Philip Ballerscheff. This is The Woodlands. If you'd like to read along to the stories that I upload or that I read to, you can find a link to that in the description of this video. And as always, remember to like, share, and subscribe. The way the sun hit the pond this past summer had made it seem as blue as ink. The effect remained even when she got closer. Usually these things vanished before she could properly admire them, so Ava had made sure she would remember it. She found the fall to be much less spectacular. This morning Ava got up to make breakfast. She looked out the window. The sky's only color, besides the gray of the clouds that covered nearly everything above her like a lid, was the blue in the sky's far corner. Who or what was setting things to boil, or if boiling was what would happen, Ava didn't know. She was at war with much of the world and what it required of her. For a month now, she and the power company had been fighting over money. Only Ava could remember exactly how much. The problem was that the power company had billed her for more than what her meter said. She explained this over the phone the very day she got their letter. They carried out the rest of their dispute with the same distance. As much as she would like to, Ava couldn't complain in person. Every time she called to fix it, she had to work her way up from the lowest beleaguered employee of the company's call center to the people who could actually help her. At first, she had accepted their excuses as genuine. "It'll take a week," the woman on the other end said. These things take time, Ava thought, and thanked her. Ava called again a week later. She got a man that time. "You billed me for $50 more than my meter says. I told you that already. I can read it to you to prove it." She did. The man said he was sorry, and that he'd have to transfer her to someone else. She reminded herself that there was no reason to get mad at him. He was following policy. He had to, however much he might disagree with it. Though she never made the distinction openly, it was clear to her son Johnny that disputing the bill was a matter of principle, not need. He'd explained this to his younger sister Cecilia. For these sorts of discussions, the woods provided more privacy than their house. If you let them get away with it once, they'll walk all over you. Ava said this whenever her children pleaded for her to give up. She intended those to be the last words anyone said on the subject, but they never were. When someone left a light on without using it, she batted away whoever stood nearest to the light switch, adult or child, whether or not they were responsible. She scolded as if there were a real and obvious danger to leaving it on for longer than necessary, one that everybody but her was ignoring or somehow just couldn't see. "You can read with a lamp. You don't need the whole room. And the sun's still out," she had said to Johnny yesterday. Thankfully, the sun went down slowly enough for him to finish his book. At bedtime, though, he undressed by moonlight. His jeans fell to his feet like a sack. He put them, along with his other clothes, over his chair because that was what he could best make out in the darkness. The next morning the sun fell on them through the window, as if to tell him what to do with them. A while ago his uncle said they'd better get candles if Ava was going to fuss about a little light. It was because he was a guest that she took the remark in stride, shrugging to say she knew he was right, but an old woman like her was stuck in her ways. Her frantic behavior reminded Johnny of people turning off their lights during wartime to hide from bombers. Johnny waited until his uncle was gone, and he and Cecilia were in the forest to tell her about it. She laughed. Johnny just smiled. He no longer spoiled his jokes by laughing while he told them, like so many children do. As loud and as long as Cecilia laughed, they felt the silence that returned afterwards all the more. He had watched her go from baby to girl, and so had known her when she laughed at things that weren't nearly as funny. Even now, she was still undoubtedly his little sister, and couldn't be mistaken, either in height or in the age that showed on her face, for anyone else. Likewise, Johnny was her brother and Ava's son, and looked the part too. In those early days he had, if in a bad mood and without somewhere else to put his feelings, used Cecilia as a confessional. He reasoned that she would remember how he spoke, but not what he said. Once, once and never again, he had left the window open and the air conditioner on. His mother asked him if she hadn't taught him better than that. He admitted she had. His father, Dean Lee, had stepped aside to remain a neutral party. Johnny told Cecilia about it as he was folding laundry in her room, speaking down into her crib. I don't get why they're like that, he said, but he did. He knew his mother wanted him to be orderly, and that his father didn't feel it concerned him. Johnny was younger then than his sister was now, and could be made to feel guilt far more easily than at any time since. He didn't quite adopt his mother's principles, but he followed more and more of her rules. While her children had their private jokes, Ava made hers in public. "We have running water, run and get some," was a family heirloom. You'd hear it nowadays preceded by "my pa used to say that," or sometimes "ma," and then the joke itself. That pa or ma and those of other families had never actually said that because of a real lack of running water. Nor did they lack electricity, for which I've forgotten the matching joke. Ava kept these jokes long after the people of whom they were true had died, long after her decades of bad posture gave her a hunch like her mother. That hunch, once premature, had now really grown into its own, and no longer needed Ava's help to keep her back bent. Their pa was still healthy. "He has better luck," Ava said. Uh, Better habits, he argued. He hadn't, he hadn't ever prodded her to adopt these habits. People could learn by his examples or by their own mistakes, or they wouldn't learn at all. As for their uncle, he was never bigger than the day he died. It seemed as though nearly everyone came who had known him well. Johnny thought this was the real measure of a man, when people had nothing to gain. His uncle included only his immediate family in his will. None of that third cousin by a mother once removed stuff he'd said to his executor. Johnny's theory relied on two assumptions, which he tested against the evidence he'd gathered over his short life and found to be true. One, this was good proof of someone's character. Two, the people, quote, gathered here there today, end quote, to paraphrase and make grammatical what the preacher said, meant to prove anything of the sort by their attending the funeral. Johnny didn't read so much into it. The size of the crowd impressed him, as well as the passion with which his uncle's friends spoke. They were strangers to him. That hadn't changed much by the time they finished speaking. The eulogy centered around the man of the hour and themselves. This day, like so much else, was never again at the forefront of Johnny's mind. His theory, developed hastily as he saw the funeral parlor fill up with mourners, never went beyond this first stage. Ava worked part-time to take care of the kids. Dean worked full-time to take care of the bills. He argued that he should be just as responsible for parenting as she was, but Ava, in turn, should understand what he went through. Happily, he would explain, as if to put his complaints in a new light, because he couldn't take them back. He always threw up his hands, too. "I do it happily. For you, for me, for everyone." When Johnny and Cecilia came home from school, she had them greet their father and then rushed them outside so they wouldn't bother him anymore. They told her they'd decided to explore the forest, hunt some squirrels since there were no deer. Yes, yes, fine, their mother said, her mind already on other things. They set off on their journey, thinking they would find something just waiting to be caught when they walked past their mailbox. It wasn't so, even when they entered the forest. In fact, for a time, there weren't any animals at all. They kept walking. The idea they had just shortly entertained seemed ridiculous, and their believing it impossible, something they each kept to themselves and correctly guessed the other also felt. As if the forest felt sorry for having messed with them, they stumbled onto a group of squirrels at the next bend. A family, Johnny said. Cecilia decided which squirrel was her and which was him. "Who's the third?" Johnny asked. "Dunno." Johnny circled the squirrels, who stayed exactly as they were. They didn't even turn to keep him in view. He looked at them, then at the depths of the forest out of which they had come. He looked to his right where Cecilia stood. "Wait here," he said. Johnny wasn't sure if he wanted to kill or just capture them, but he knew he had to take this as seriously as they did. As fast as he might be, the squirrels would outrun him. He needed bullets or arrows or something to get them quick before they could flee. Johnny took 5 steps towards his house before he turned back. Nobody, least of all his mother, would give him a weapon. Not on such short notice, anyway. He supposed he could have gotten around this by buying a BB gun, but he didn't know where he would find such a thing. Not a normal toy store, surely. It was just as unlikely that a gun store would sell them. He cast about the forest floor for something else to use, and decided on throwing stones. Try as he might, he couldn't find any big enough. It amazed him that the squirrels were still there, like they'd obeyed his command along with his sister. "All right," he said, to get himself together. "When I jump for them, I might get one. Maybe I'll send them your way, so be ready." "All right." Cecilia was willing to stand there, but hoped the squirrels wouldn't come at her. Johnny jumped, and the squirrels scattered, deeper into the forest, as predicted. The 2 squirrels with names went one way, the one without a name went somewhere else. Johnny said it made sense to follow the group. "We have a better chance of catching at least one of them," Johnny said, wiping his hands on his jeans and then spitting into his palms to wipe his face. He told Cecilia his since-aborted plan to get a gun, while they walked after the squirrels. She snorted and called him stupid. He wasn't sure how to disagree, so he didn't. The squirrels didn't flee very far. Johnny found them up ahead of the trail they were on. They had learned their lesson. Whenever Johnny, or less often Cecilia, got too close, they ran. The line between a safe distance and too close varied, and that made it hard for Johnny to stop before he crossed it. "Wait," he said, after minutes of gradually creeping towards the squirrels. "You'll scare them off." Cecilia stopped. "No, I won't. You're the one screaming." "That's not how they get scared," Johnny insisted, exasperated that he even had to say this. When each had argued for their view at length, all without convincing the other, they looked up from their argument to find that the squirrels were gone. Johnny sighed heavily. Why wouldn't the world cooperate? He and Cecilia kept walking up the trail and met them again. Frustrated with his sister, their prey, and himself, he jumped before anyone but the squirrels were ready. Cecilia froze. The others moved without knowing where they were going. He caught one by the middle. He felt it wriggle and then recoiled. "Ah, damn, it bit me," he said, at once surprised and knowing that he shouldn't be. He tried to kick it and missed. The squirrel ran out of sight. He found a stone and threw it. It thumped on the ground and would have been far from its target had Johnny even chosen one. They went home dirty and empty-handed. Johnny had an angry glare that he couldn't train on anyone but himself, much as he'd liked to. Ava saw them come in and had her expectations met. They didn't get what they ate from where they lived. Had they tried, they would have starved. She gave Johnny a bandage. Since there was nothing more to say, she let him go and made a weekly call to the power company. Johnny told his father about their hunting trip, flashing the bandage proudly. If he couldn't show something he'd backed, at least there were the injuries he'd sustained while trying. "Does your mother know?" Dean asked. Johnny nodded as he said yes, which made his voice shake. He sounded far more secretive than he was. Undaunted, he tried to fish in the pond by the forest. Why not hunt again? Well, he had done that and failed, so he thought it a better use of his time to do something else. He asked Cecilia if she wanted to come along. She said she'd had enough of that. The sun was out. It was a warm fall afternoon. Johnny dressed, and when he got to the pond, undressed the part. He took off his socks and shoes and rolled up his shirt and pants so that they were, judging by what they covered, halfway gone. He had no fishing lines and no bait, not here and not at home. He tried to weave the grass into a fishing line and then, when that failed, tried to make a net. Some tribe had done this, he was sure, but all he made was a mess. The search for bait went just as badly. There were no worms, no bread, or other scraps, nothing Johnny could use or a fish would want. He considered the stones around him, those under the water, at the shore, and in the sandy banks. They were readily available in every size and shape. There seemed no reason why they couldn't help him break his run of bad luck. He practiced throwing pebbles and then the larger rocks, but he was better at skipping them over the water than aiming at the fish, who were too quick and didn't stay in one place very long. When he'd sunk all the good stones he could find and didn't feel like looking for more, he walked along the shore, wondering what other weapons he would find. He went back to where the clearing ended and the forest began, searching the ground for a stick. He sorted what he found by size and length until he had the most naturally spear-like branch. He refined the points with a stone and tested it against his finger. If it left a mark when handled with care, just imagine what it could do with some force behind it. His confidence held out for longer than before, but gave out. His confidence held for longer than before, but gave out after failure, with no successes in between to break up the monotony. First he went after his prey, wading slowly through the water. He changed tactics, waiting for a curious fish to look him over, and then tried to run them through. In both cases he was too slow. The stones had something spontaneous about them. Grab one and test your skill. With all the work he had put into his spear, he demanded results. He got tired of trying and threw the spear in the pond. This trip ended better than the last one, he thought. Just as little good luck, but also less bad luck. Boredom instead of injury. He saw squirrels on his way home. They moved too fast to know whether they were the ones his sister had named. He told his father about the trip. His father asked if he had the spear with him. No, Johnny answered, leaving the rest unsaid. His father assured him he could bring it along some other time. 2 days after Ava's last call, the power company gave her what they owed. Maybe she had finally found someone willing and able to do their job, or maybe she had worn them down. The man on the other end had made a promise she'd heard before, but he kept it. Rather than gather the family in the living room and tell them all, she went to everyone separately. Her excitement diminished each time she repeated herself, but her feelings were clear. Johnny and Cecilia were too drained to match them. Oh, both children said. Then, after a pause, that's good. They really meant what they said, but couldn't muster up the energy to show it. Fine, Ava thought. They don't pay the bills, so of course they don't appreciate this. Her husband pretended to care more than he did. More than I should, Dean thought, but he knew it would be over sooner if he smiled the right amount and congratulated her on her persistence. Untroubled, Ava retreated to her room, thinking of what she would buy with the money she had earned. That was Woodlands, read and written by Philip Ballerscheff. Again, if you'd like to read along to the stories that I upload, you can find a link to that in the description. And as always, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks, and until next time.